Hello, Joyce Orwick. I would like to interview for my Generations to Generation interview for my interpersonal communication class. I have a few questions for you. The first one is, what year were you born?
1950.
Okay. I have a question about some historical things. Do you remember the assassination of President Kennedy?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was in junior high.
Do you remember, can you go through maybe what that day was like?
I remember that we were in the gym at some kind of assembly, and the announcement came over the loudspeaker that the president had been shot and had been rushed to the hospital. And they right away sent us back to our classes, and pretty soon they came over and announced that he was dead. And that was a huge shock to everybody. That was, all we had was just regular TV back then, but all we did for the next few days was watch the coverage of the funeral and Lyndon Johnson becoming the president and the various things that happened then. It was dramatic.
Can you say if that's affected the way that you have lived your life in any way? Has that changed maybe some of your views?
Well, we were Republicans, and of course he was a Democratic president, and I think it makes you feel like politics don't matter so much when it comes down to just human beings, because he was our president, and whether we agreed with his politics or not, we're all still Americans. So in the long run, politics are not the most important thing.
Okay. Another thing, since you mentioned you're a Republican, what president did you vote for that you've actually liked the most?
Probably President Reagan.
Can you explain why?
President.
What are some of the reasons you liked Reagan?
He gave speeches that were actually fun to listen to. You could understand everything he was talking about and agree with him, and he made sense, and he got right to the heart of the matter, and it was fun to listen to his speeches. Most politicians are kind of boring.
I agree. What wars do you recall?
Well, the Vietnam War was most of the time when we were in high school and a little shortly after, and so it mostly affected the people that I knew, friends and kids from high school that served in Vietnam and were in the military at that time. So I would have to probably say Vietnam.
You mentioned high school. What was high school like for you?
Way less technology. Nobody had cell phones. Nobody had computers. That's the odd thing looking back now. I think we actually had a lot of freedom, at least in my school we did. We could go away from campus for lunch. We drove cars because it was Champaign, and just had a lot of freedom that I don't know if kids do nowadays or not.
Yeah. Another thing that I was interested in asking you was, growing up, what type of music did you listen to?
Oh, rock and roll. What do you think?
Who were some of your favorite?
The Beatles were huge. Yeah, the Beatles, rock and roll. Yeah, the '60s.
Yeah. Were there any things growing up that were culturally unaccepted that are more accepted today that you can think of?
Things that were acceptable then that aren't now.
Yeah.
There wasn't so much emphasis on political correctness. People didn't monitor every word that they said as much as we deem to now. People said, derogatory things about different groups of people, stereotypes and stuff, without too much consideration of people's feelings, I guess.
Okay. And then on the opposite end of that, what were some things that weren't acceptable when you were growing up that are now deemed very acceptable acts?
An awful lot of sexual stuff. There's an awful lot. On TV, even married couples didn't sleep in the same bed. They had separate beds, like Lucy, I Love Lucy, and the Dick Van Dyke Show, and things like that. So, yeah, a lot more freedom for that.
Talking about that, and we also talked a little bit about music. You were around the time of Elvis, right?
Yeah.
So, what were some of the cultural things that you think Elvis might have affected?
Oh, Elvis was the one who did all the hips movements, and when he was on the network television, the Ed Sullivan Show, they wouldn't film his lower part of his body. That was considered vulgar, the way he moved his hips around. Now it seems pretty innocent and childish. Times change.
And then for work, what did you do occupationally for most of your life?
When I was a kid, I babysat a lot. People used to call me up and pay me the grand sum of 50 cents an hour, and I would come watch the kids for them. Then I got a job in the drugstore. I worked at Where I Met Your Dad, worked at the drugstore in high school. I think I made $1.35 an hour, which was a huge pay increase. I loved it.
What is the one thing you would say over your life you've accomplished that you're most proud of?
I would say you and the rest of the family. The one thing that is sad about these days is that so many families aren't together. Parents divorce and kids go their separate ways. And I'm pleased that our family seems pretty. I mean, I know we're geographically spread out now with some of you kids living out of state and stuff, but I think we all are just there for each other. Like Anna's wedding, we had a good time together and a lot of fun.
Speaking of family, you have how many children?
9.
9 children. And how many grandchildren?
I have 10 now and one due in a week. So
Okay.
we'll be 11.
And a quick trick question. Who's your favorite son?
Caleb. Well, you know, the favorite, the old saying is the favorite is always the one that's furthest away or hurt or sick or sad or needs you the most. That's your favorite. So you can figure out who needs me the most right now, you'll know.
Good answer, good answer. Also, another thing I'd like to ask you about is culturally growing up, what was something that was deemed acceptable that you completely disagreed with?